Welcome to our webinar series, free monthly webinar series hosted by EPA's Office of Research and Development and the Office of Water. If today's topic is America's Water Infrastructure Act, Risk and Resilience Checklist and Lessons Learned. If you're interested in the schedule for other topics coming up and recordings of past webinars, you can click the link on the top right of this introduction slide. Also, if you're looking for the slides for this presentation, they're located under the handout section on the right navigation bar on your screen. And if you're interested, as the talks are going on, if you're interested in asking the speakers a question, which we'll handle at the end of both talk, or at the end of the second talk, it's real important that go to the questions box on your navigation bar and type in the question there. And then after the second speaker, we'll get to those questions. And if we get a number of them right up front while the speakers are presenting, that really helps us organize these questions and we can get right into the questions. If you're having a problem with webinar support, you can click on or email that link right there, webcastinfo@cadmusgroup.com. Okay, and the final thing on this introduction slide is a certificate attendance is available, provided that you watch this webinar series. So in the next slide, if we go to the next slide, the requirements of getting a certificate of attendance is you must be registered or be in a room with somebody who is. You must attend the live webinar for 60 minutes. And if you're in a room with others, first of all, be safe, but the names of people not logged in must be provided by the person who is logged in. Type those names in the question box or send them to the email address listed here. Okay, in the next slide, we have two more webinar series presentations coming up on July 29th. There's water reuse for agricultural purposes. And on August 6th, we have a presentation on PFAS removal and drinking water treatment systems. So please tune in for those webinar series. We'd be glad to have you. In the fourth slide, we have just an announcement that we've got our 17th annual drinking water workshop for small systems coming up. This is the first year that we're going virtual for obvious reasons. The small systems workshop will be August 31st to September 3rd. So you can click on the link there or go to that link for details, the agenda, registration, etc. Give us a little bit of patience here because this is the first year we're doing the entire workshop virtually, but we should be able to have everything set up by August 31st. So thank you very much. And now I will hand off the podium to Deborah, who will introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, this is Deborah Fox-Renwick from the Office of Water, and our first presentation today is going to be on the EPA Small System Risk and Resilience Assessment Checklist. And our presenter is Lauren Wisniewski from the Office of Water here at EPA. She has developed the EPA Power Resilience Guide for water and wastewater utilities, has led over 25 workshops across the country for drinking water and wastewater utilities on resilience, infrastructure protection, and coordination with other critical infrastructure sectors, including energy, emergency services, and food and agriculture. She is an environmental engineer, and she serves in EPA's Response Support Corps and has staffed the water desk for EPA's Emergency Operations Center during several activations. Lauren has a BS in Civil Engineering from Duke University and an MPH from George Washington University. And now, thank you so much, Lauren. I'll hand it over to you.
Great. So, as you may have heard, in October of 2018, America's Water Infrastructure Act, or AWIA, since the government has to have an acronym for just about everything, was signed into law. And this law requires applicable drinking water utilities to conduct risk and resilience assessments and update their emergency response plans. The law includes components to the risk assessments and ERPs, or emergency response plans, must address, and establishes deadlines by which water systems must certify to EPA that they've completed their risk assessment and emergency response plan. And we'll discuss these today. And the focus of the first half of my presentation will be on the Small Systems Risk and Resilience Assessment Checklist. And this guidance is something that EPA developed as a voluntary protocol that provides a simpler qualitative risk and resilience assessment in comparison to, for example, VSAT, the vulnerability self-assessment tool that I'll refer to a little bit later in the presentation as well, that provides a much more detailed quantitative risk and resilience assessment. So this checklist was developed for water systems that may not have the resources to perform a full quantitative risk assessment, or that prefer filling out a document instead of using an electronic tool. This checklist does not address the emergency response plans, but EPA has developed an emergency response plan template and instructions that I'll talk about in the second half of my presentation. And this guidance does not address other aspects of water system risk management planning that you may also want to address at your utility. So who should use this guidance? No water system is required to use this guidance. The America's Water Infrastructure Act allows any approach that complies with the statute. It's primarily intended for clean water or community water systems serving between 3,300 and 50,000 people, which is the smallest size category that must comply with AWIA. For larger systems, EPA recommends a quantitative risk assessment such as VSAT or the J100. And for systems smaller than 3,300 people, the AWIA risk and resilient assessments is not required. However, EPA plans to publish guidance and information for these very small systems to conduct such assessments and emergency response plans later this year. So what are the requirements in AWIA for the risk and resilience assessments? AWIA specifies 10 different categories or types of assets that must be addressed in these risk and resilience assessments. And one important distinction between AWIA and the much earlier 2002 Bioterrorism Act is that AWIA addresses both malevolent acts and natural hazards, whereas the vulnerability assessments that you may have conducted or heard about from the 2002 Bioterrorism Act really just focused on man-made acts of terrorism or other man-made hazards. So the assets at a water utility that AWIA addresses include physical barriers, source water, pipes and conveyances, pretreatment and treatment, storage and distribution facilities, electronic and computer and other automated systems, monitoring practices, financial infrastructure, the use, storage, and handling of chemicals, and also the operation and maintenance of the system. The risk and resilience assessments can also include an evaluation of capital and operational needs for risk and resilience management. Community water systems must certify to EPA that they've completed their risk and resilience assessments. Another key difference between AWIA and the 2002 Bioterrorism Act is that you do not submit your assessment to EPA. You only certify that you completed it. EPA's website has information on the certification procedures, including EPA's online certification system. As you can see in this slide, the deadline depends on the 3 different sizes of utilities that covered by AWIA, with the first deadline already passed. The next size, the next deadline for medium systems being December 31st, 2020. And then for the smallest systems covered by AWIA, the deadline is June 30th, 2021. Once you certify that you've completed a risk and resilience assessment for your utility, you then have 6 months to complete and then certify that you've updated or reviewed your emergency response plan. Another key component of AWIA to keep in mind is that this is a 5-year requirement, so that 5 years from now, we'll be cycling through the same sets of deadlines for the 3 different sized systems. Before we get into the checklist, I just want to review a few risk assessment concepts that many of you may know, but others might want a refresher. So risk is a function of the threat, the vulnerability, and the consequences. The threat is the malevolent act or natural hazard. It would be something like a cyber attack, a hurricane, an earthquake, a pandemic. The threat likelihood is a probability of that attack or natural hazard occurring. A vulnerability is a weakness that can be exploited by an adversary or impacted by a natural hazard. And this can be a physical asset or vulnerability, or as well as an electronic, human element, if that has a role. That there's all different types of vulnerabilities that you may assess. The vulnerability likelihood is the probability that if the malevolent act or natural hazard occurred, then the water system would suffer significant adverse impacts. For example, you don't have backup power, and then your water system is left without power for a duration of time. The consequences are the losses that would ensue if a threat had an adverse impact against a water system. Consequences may include things such as economic loss to the water system and also to the utility service area. It could have illness or deaths if there was water contamination. That going back to the power loss example, the threat is the hurricane that takes out the power. The vulnerability is that there's no backup power, so the electric grid goes down, there's no power, the water system can't treat and distribute water, and then the community has issues at restaurants and hospitals, critical infrastructure, and the water utility loses its product, so it's not earning money when the power is out and it can't service its customers. Countermeasures, which is something that we'll get into in a little bit, are steps that you can take to reduce the risk and increase resilience. And this could be plans, equipment, procedures, or other measures. The threats in EPA's small systems checklist are the ones listed on the screen. There's the malevolent acts or intentional acts on a water system that can be physical, accidental, or cyber, as well as natural hazards that, floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, ice storms, wildfire, and other such hazards. So the small systems checklist has 10 sets of tables corresponding to the 10 asset categories in AWIA. In each set of tables, you select for your particular area and utility the malevolent acts and natural hazards from the table that pose a significant risk to the asset category. So earthquakes may be a big deal or be selected for California water utilities, but not hurricanes. Whereas if you go to North Carolina, it might be the reverse of that. You can also write in any acts or hazards that aren't listed. And to remember sort of the prevalence and the vulnerabilities and the consequences that we talked about earlier. And if you want some help on that, there's EPA's baseline information on malevolent acts relevant to community water systems that can provide additional information. And then for each threat that you pick, you briefly describe how it could impact the asset category in the community water system. So for example, we'll get to the example in a minute, but so as you go through the checklist, and this is a PDF file on EPA's website, but embedded within the PDF is a Word document that you can then take and customize for your utility. You provide some basic information, your utility's name, the PWS ID, the date of analysis, and any particular notes. And then there are 10 sets of tables, And each set refer back to those 10 different elements that I mentioned on an earlier slide. You're starting with physical barriers. And so then it, gives you some examples of what that would include, fencing, perimeter walls, gates. And so then you go through and you pick, all right, these are the ones that I'm most concerned about at my utility. And you check those off. And then for the ones that you check, you provide a brief description of the impacts. And then the same exercise for physical barriers, except for this time with natural hazards, whether it be hurricanes, flooding, earthquakes, or any other natural hazards that you might have. And so the checklist goes through that with 10 tables, A and B, for both malevolent acts as well as natural hazards. And then there's an optional table 11 where you can look at countermeasures. And this is where you would put down a countermeasure that you could have at your utility, and then a description of how that would reduce the risk or increase the resilience at your utility. So just to kind of, as we wrap up this and kind of talk about, what the differences are, that, this is a qualitative risk assessment. It identifies high-risk threats and vulnerabilities. It also identifies countermeasures, and it's a paper analysis that requires minimal resources to report. VSAT, such as, and we now have VSAT 2.0 that was released in August 2019. That is a quantitative risk assessment, and so it estimates what are the threats, vulnerabilities, consequences, and monetized risk. It can quantify countermeasures for cost and risk reduction, and but it also requires a significant amount of time and information to complete. So that just gives you a broad overview of what the two tools are and which one might be better for you and your utility. So once you've done your risk and resilience assessment and you certify to EPA that you've completed it, the next step is to go to the emergency response plan. EPA has developed a template for conducting the emergency response plan, and AWIA outlines 4 different categories for the emergency response plans that are listed here on the slide. The first is strategies and resources to improve resilience. These are resilience strategies, as we'll call them, both in the template and in this presentation. The plans and procedures and equipment for responding to the malevolent act or natural hazards. These are the emergency plans. There are also mitigation actions, and this is actions, procedures, and equipment to lessen the impact of malevolent act or natural hazard. And finally, there are detection strategies to detect malevolent acts or natural hazards. The ERP template and instructions was designed to help water utilities in developing their emergency response plan to meet the requirements of AWIA Section 2013B. It's a PDF document, but also includes a embedded Word document that you can use to change the tables and customize for your utility. It also includes fillable tables, checklists, and charts. That's a starting point for developing emergency response plans. Here is the table of contents. Similar to the risk and resilience assessments, you start with some utility information, this time a little bit more detailed, and then you hit on the 4 different components that I mentioned earlier, starting with the resilience strategies. During an incident, you want to make sure that you have as much information about your system as you might need readily available for you, your personnel, first responders, contractors who you may rely on, and other partner agencies. So this would be information about your utility, the location of assets, wellheads, pumping stations, personnel information, so cell phone numbers and emergency contacts for your employees, where all the utility components are. And then this is a tie-in to AWIA section 2018, with the chemicals and chemicals that may be in your utility service area. If there was an emergency spill, that you have that information to get. Also information on safety, the closest hospital, and other safety information that could be relevant for your staff. Response resources that you have at your utility, as well as it might be available at the Emergency Management Agency or through the WARN, the Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network, or other mutual aid, and other local services that could be of importance to your utility. So in characterizing the utility information, this is an example where it just provides the basic information of wellheads, intakes, the plant name, so that you have all of this information in writing, so that if your electronics go down unexpectedly, you're not left with no information about what's going on, because you're so reliant on the SCADA and the electronic information that we've all become dependent on. And so once you have kind of filled out sort of the basics about your utility, you look at resilience strategy. And what are the emergency response roles that you need staff to have? To think about the incident command system and whether you want to use that in your utility, and how you would get trained up on that. How you would communicate internally, externally with key partners, with critical customers such as hospitals and dialysis center. What equipment would you use? If cell phones aren't working, what is your backup communication measures? To think about your media outreach and risk communication. Do you have all of the information in advance of any newspapers or television stations or radio stations that you would want to report on any key information? And then to have boil water notices and other public notification templates ready to go, so that you don't need to spend as much time developing them in an emergency. So here is another screenshot from the template that shows how the resilience strategies could fit into this emergency response plan. This particular category is looking at emergency response roles, so that you would list the names of the people, what their role is, and what their responsibilities are, so that you know who would be doing what during an emergency. Then the next section of the emergency response plan is the plans and procedures. And this is the plans, procedures, and equipment that can be used in the event of a malevolent act or natural hazard that could threaten your utility's ability to deliver safe drinking water safe drinking water. There are two different types of emergency response plans and procedures that should be a part of the emergency response plan. First, there's the core response procedure, and these are general building blocks that would be utilized in most, if not all, emergencies. And then there are incident-specific response procedures that have to do with how you would deal with particular threats or acts against the utility. So here's a list of what some of the core procedures would include. And these are things about access to your utility. If there are roadblocks, do you have the credentials to get past barricades? Do your suppliers have that access? Do you have access to your remote sites? Physical security, how do your gates and other security mechanisms work without power? Or if there's a compromise on the electronic systems and there's a cyber attack, power loss, and what your plans are with that. Also, in the event that you're not able to provide drinking water to your customers, what are the plans for alternative supplies? What is your sampling and analysis plan in the collection system to deal with a potential contamination event? And then finally, have you, prepared your staff? Because if they're worried about their families, then they're not going to be able to do their jobs well. And so are they prepared to deal with emergencies? The incident-specific response plans, in contrast to the core ones, are specialized procedures that are more tailored to this particular type of incident. EPA has developed a whole number of incident action checklist, and these are ones that you could use as part of your incident-specific response plan. The pandemic has been updated in March of this year, and we also have one on power outages now as well. And so this is an example of the pandemic incident action checklist, where it would have actions to respond to a pandemic, the initial actions, how to protect employee health, how to maintain essential operations. And so on this website, you can have access to all of EPA's checklist and then incorporate those into your emergency response plans. The next section of the emergency response plan is mitigation actions. And these are actions, procedures, and equipment that can help to reduce the impact of a malevolent act or natural hazard. This could include things such as the development of alternative water supplies, the relocation of water intakes, having flood protection with barriers, having backup power, maybe joining the Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network to have access to more resources and mutual aid during an emergency. And these are all things that can help you to better withstand and rapidly recover or bounce back from any kind of adverse incident or event that could happen at your utility. The final section of the emergency response plan is the detection strategies. And these are strategies that can help you detect malevolent acts or natural hazards that threaten the security or resilience of your utility. Some of them can be as simple as creating a security awareness around with your staff that, if they see something, they say something. And it's not just your staff, it's also, your landscapers who are mowing the grass at a remote location and happen to notice, that the fence has been broken, or you've established a relationship with law enforcement. And so when they're patrolling, their jurisdiction and happen to notice something doesn't quite look right near the water tower, they know what it's supposed to look like and who to contact at the water utility. It could also involve, sampling and some of the other, strategies, but it's all different things to help you to better, detect something is going wrong as soon as possible, and then to implement the emergency response plan as needed. So in the template, this kind of touches on some of the things that I just mentioned, that, you'd have the various threats, and then kind of what is your detection method, whether it be, sampling and testing, alarms, following, weather alerts, and then what is your procedure when, you notice that something's off, to make sure that that gets addressed as soon as possible. So here is my contact information, which you'll have now with the slides, as well as our division has all of our AWIA resources, including the checklist that I mentioned, the emergency response plan template, the baseline threats document, and other information, all from that webpage that you can use to implement AWIA at your utility. And then I think with that, we're gonna turn it over to the next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. Just a reminder quickly between the presentations that if you have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the question box. We are tracking all of your questions and organizing them to be able to ask at the end. So if during Chris's presentation a question for Lauren occurs to you, please go ahead and type it in. Our next presentation is on risk and resiliency assessments. So one technical assistance provider's perspective. And so this will be presented by Chris Wells from the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, RCAP, in Kentucky, where he's worked since 2001. As a technical assistance provider, he has assisted small rural communities with various water and wastewater needs. Prior to RCAP, he was a client relations representative, a project manager, and a field technician at an environmental engineering company, and a tax clerk for the city of Nicholasville. Chris has an associate's degree in applied sciences, business management, and has 30 years of experience in the field. Thank you, Chris. Handing it over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you today, for everyone on board. Yes, my name is Chris Wells, and I do work for the Rural Community Assistance Partnership in Kentucky. I will try to speak slow. Apparently, when I get nervous, I talk fast, and I talk fast anyway. So I'm going to do my very best to slow down so that we can you can actually understand what I'm trying to communicate to you today. A few of the objectives today that I would like to talk to you about. As I say, over the last 18 plus years, I started in 2001. I've done, like I say, worked with several small rural communities in Kentucky for RCAP. And just wanted to discuss a few things maybe from a technical assistance point of view for someone who's worked in the field as long as I have. And I've had good experiences and I've had some not so good experiences over the years, but you learn from every experience. And so what I would like to kind of talk about a little bit in the limited time that I have today are some of the potential challenges and barriers that may be possible with risk and resiliency assessments. As I say, I've done several vulnerability assessments over the years and emergency response plans for these systems. And as you know, with this new law, with AWIA coming on board now, I believe some of the same challenges and barriers are there with risk and resiliency as they were with vulnerability assessments. So I'd like to kind of give my perspective on that a little bit. And then I'd like to kind of compare what we at RCAP, or what I have done with RCAP in Kentucky with vulnerability assessments over the years, and kind of see if that can be a smooth transition into the new requirement, the new risk and resiliency requirement under AWIA. And then someone from our national office has asked me to mention, and we're going to talk briefly about some of these new RCAP tools that we have from the national level regarding AWIA, and we have some e-learning modules as well. So I do want to discuss those briefly toward the end. Why vulnerability, or why RRA and emergency response plan required? Well, as we know, like I said, I started in February of 2001. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to go to help communities and take on the world with RCAP. And then later that year on 9/11, we all know, I guess I would venture to say that we all remember where we were on that day. I know in a different era, people remember where they were when Kennedy was shot, and I would dare say that we all remember where we were when 9/11 occurred. I was actually at a meeting in Clark County, Kentucky, which is in central Kentucky, with a co-worker of mine and our state director. When we went into that meeting, everything was fine. And an hour and a half later, when we came back out, everything had hit the fan. It was certainly a different world when we came out of that meeting. And so I say we will never forget that. I know I won't ever forget that.
Hey, Chris, can you hear us?
Yes.
We're having a bit of trouble seeing your screen. So
Okay.
I'm going to take control and then pass it back to you and see if that works.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. All right. Making you the presenter again.
So show my screen.
Awesome. That looks great. I think we should be good now.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you so much.
Technologically challenged as well, so that could have very well been me. I don't know. I hope not. So can you see it now, Kayla?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, wonderful. So as I said, we just must never forget, what happened. We will not forget what happened, and that is why we need to make sure that we keep our utilities safe, as well as other aspects of our country as well. So once again, whoop, we mentioned the EPA Bioterrorism Act obviously mandated that water and wastewater facilities have vulnerability assessments and emergency response plans. EPA is one of the funders of our program, as is USDA Rural Development, and the Office of Management and Budget had also required or mandated that rural development require all their borrowers to also have vulnerability assessments and emergency response plans. So, they were also required to do that. So we have a lot of RD borrowers that are our communities. So we've been, like I say, doing these for quite a long time. Rural development requires that they review and update, the systems review and update their VAERPs, well now RRAs, every 3 years. I know.
Hey, Chris, can you hear us again? Sorry about that.
Can you not hear me?
We can hear you. People are still having trouble seeing your screen, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll have you speak to what I'm showing. So hang on 1 second.
Okay, do you just want to run my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, if it's something I'm doing.
No worries. All right. All right, everyone should be able to see now. We're on slide 37.
Okay, I'll just tell you next slide when I need the next slide.
Yes, sounds great.
Okay. So, like I say, once again, I think that the technological bug has smacked me in the head, and that's okay. I apologize. So we know under AWIA, as I say, rural development requires every 3 years that VAs, ERPs were updated over the years. Now we have, of course, the new AWIA rule, and where EPA is going to require every 5 years, obviously, that they need to be updated and certified that they've been reviewed and updated. Just want to take a quick shout out to, and I know on our Division of Water, our state primacy agency in Kentucky, obviously does the triennial sanitary survey on all the water systems throughout the state every 3 years, and they check on vulnerability assessment, emergency response plan information there as well. Just want to give a good shout out to our state primacy agency. They do a fabulous job. We have a great working relationship with them. And I think it helps us be more effective in how we work with communities, the fact that we have such a good working relationship with our state primacy agency. Next slide. So some of the potential barriers or challenges that we found with vulnerability assessment and with the new AWIA requirements with the risk and resiliency assessments. First one being system trust. As a TAP, you have to have the system's trust in order to assist them effectively. They have to trust you. And over the years, like I say, we have built good relationships with the small communities that we work with throughout the state. Many times we're referred to communities by rural development or by EPA, by our state primacy. And when they know you're from Frankfort, that's where our offices are located, in the state capital of Frankfort. We're also where our state primacy agency is located. They get a little tense. They might tense up and think, well, you're here, you're going to try to throw a rag at me, or you're going to try to do this. We're actually there to help, and we try to make them understand that we're there to assist them. And the same thing with these risk and resiliency assessments. They're not going to give you the information that you need to assist them if they don't trust you. So you have to build that trust in. Like I say, that can happen over time. More times than not, when we go into a community, if we can assist them with something small to start with and show them that we're there to help them and that we're not going to, we're not enforcement, we're there to try to help them to comply and to avoid enforcement. And so once we get that trust built, that's a good thing. A lot of times they think of Division of Water or that they are the nail and Division of Water is the hammer. And that's just not always the case. We try to make them understand that the Division of Water, yes, they are there to make sure they comply with the regulations, but they are also there to assist these systems and to make sure they succeed. So definitely trust is the main thing you have to have first. And then many of these systems, once you gain that, can be resistant to change. They like the status quo. Who doesn't, right? A lot of times we like the status quo. You've heard this quote, we have always done it that way. We like to keep things the way they are. Nobody likes change. Change is inevitable. Some change is good, some change is bad, but change is inevitable. I have a story I like to share about my stepson who he really does not like change. And growing up, he didn't like change. And my wife could never get rid of anything because like old furniture and old chairs, she tried to get rid of one. She had to wait till he went to summer camp to try to get rid of it. And the garbage man hadn't come and picked it up yet, and he tried to drag it back in. So that can happen. I totally understand that. We're human beings and we don't like change. But as I said, change is inevitable, and we have to make these systems understand that. But if we prepare for it, we can embrace it, and it can be a good thing. Albert Einstein, I think, is credited with saying that insanity is the act of doing things the same way over and over again, but expecting different results. Yes, that is true. I believe that is true. So they can be somewhat resistant to change. Also, difficult to think outside the box. That kind of goes along with resistant to change. They've done the same things the same way for so long. It can be difficult to come up with other ways of doing things. And I think that's where RCAP comes in handy. We have some innovative ideas sometimes where we're just coming at it from a different angle, or we've assisted so many different systems and seen so many different situations that we can maybe bring a fresh perspective to it. And they just don't think of themselves as creative thinkers, but they really are if they just thought about the situation. But we try to help them with that as well. So that could be another potential barrier. System finances. Of course, we all know that during this COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly here in Kentucky, water systems are not allowed to cut off customers for non-payment, and they're not allowed to collect for late fees right now since the pandemic began back in mid-March. And this has put a great financial strain on many of the water systems here in the state, not just the small ones, but the big ones as well. I mean, Louisville, which is one of the biggest water systems in the state. Obviously, we don't assist Louisville because they're urban, and they have a lot more people than we serve. But they reported that during the pandemic, that 70% during this pandemic, rather 70% of their non-paying or late payment customers had never been late before. So we know that people are suffering. We know people have lost jobs. We know that the public's suffering, and we know that these water systems have to provide this essential water. If we have to wash our hands so many times and so forth, people have to live, and so they have to have water provided. But it does kind of put them in a kind of a hard financial shape. A lot of the citizens, and particularly some of these small ones in our state. And so that's why it's so important to be able to prioritize what these risks are and to be able to address those and find ways to address those. I think a lot of times they feel like MacGyver. Honestly, you have 2 soda cans and some chewed bubble gum and some fishing line. Now go out there and fix that pump at the pump station. Now that's a slight exaggeration, but I think many times that's how they feel. And I believe also that we need to give them great respect for the job that they do. And I don't think they get that. I know I'm preaching to the choir with everyone on the call today, most likely, because we know they're licensed professionals and they are on the front lines of public health in our communities. And if they do not do their job correctly, then people die. So I know, like I say, everybody here is probably appreciative of them, but we need to get that out to the communities and out to the public that they need to be showing appreciation for these water operators. And I'll get off my soapbox on that. Lack of communication. Communication is huge. Communication between the operator and the office staff. Communication between the operator and the board or the city council. Communication between the system and police and fire and EMS when we're getting into the ERP is so important, and not just in this situation, but we know communication is key in whatever you're doing. So unfortunately, in a lot of our systems, communication is not great. I think it can be improved, and we try to make sure everybody's on the same page and pulling in the same direction. And that's what I would suggest as far as a way to get around that barrier. It can be difficult, but I believe it can be done. And then the last thing, as far as a potential barrier, is just getting buy-in from the community. Many times, they're not looking to, we want to make it beneficial for the community, not just a check the box exercise. Unfortunately, bottom line is they want to make sure they get this AWIA requirement met. And many times they're just looking to, do that in the least intrusive way. And that's fine, but we also try to push the envelope slightly with them if we think we can, because we also try to build capacity in these communities as well. And we like to make sure that we can leave it better than we found it with them, and we want to see them succeed. We take a personal interest in our communities and want to see them succeed. Next slide. So we're talking about vulnerabilities, we're talking about risks. In Kentucky, you know, we do work with small rural systems. Now in Kentucky, we do not have the, you know, in some states they deal with small systems saying maybe that's 20 households or 30 households on a system. We do not have that in Kentucky. We've been utilizing regionalization system for a long time in the state. And so even so, many of the systems I work with are under the 3,300 population requirement for AWIA. So they're not required right now to meet AWIA, but we have assisted them with vulnerability assessments and emergency response plans in the past. And so we will continue to assist those size systems. Now, we also do work with systems between 3,300 and 10,000 is a cap usually on the systems we work with in the state. And we certainly are going to be assisting those systems with the requirements of AWIA. Next slide. It's funny, sometimes before we start with systems, we do this at some of the trainings that we do. Sometimes we'll do it when we actually go and meet with the system before we try to talk about vulnerabilities or risks. We ask them to sketch the front of a penny from memory. Now, many of you all may not use loose change and stuff in your states. In Kentucky, we do. And where I travel a lot around with communities, I have a lot of pocket change all the time, and I think a lot of our operators do as well. So I guess point being is if you try to sit down, I don't know if you have any scrap paper with you, try to sketch the front of a penny without looking at it and see if you get everything that's on the front of a penny. There's 4 things on there, and you know, see if you can do that. Next slide. And that is the front of a penny. Now, I've tried to do this in the past. I didn't get all 4 things. I knew there were more things on there. I knew that Lincoln was on there. I even got the profile in the correct direction. I knew the date was on there. Couldn't remember In God We Trust and couldn't remember Liberty, but they're both on there as well. And I guess point being is it's just a good way to use it as an example that, you know, that's something that they see every day. They use pocket change, you know, all the time. It's something they see all the time. But we have to be intentional. We have to be detailed. We have to be intentional and detailed as possible when trying to identify the potential risk in our system and how to respond to those risks and ways to achieve resiliency within our water system. So we just kind of try to use that as an example with them. It doesn't always work, but like I said, you should try that sometime with someone and see if they're smart enough to figure out what those 4 things are on the front of the penny. Next slide. So we try, like I said, to determine the critical components in their water system. And of course, with source water, we are blessed to have all kinds of water in the state of Kentucky, not just surface water, but groundwater. So we have groundwater, surface water systems, groundwater under the direct influence of surface water. We even have a few mine systems in Kentucky. And then a lot of systems where we've had all this regionalization are strictly purchase systems. All they do is purchase their water. You know, treatment plants, we go on and on about how many things are a treatment plant, you know, buildings and pumps, and the treatment equipment and process controls and our chemical storage. And if there's a laboratory there at the plant, laboratory chemicals and storage. Our power, our primary and our auxiliary power. Do they have like backup generators at the plant? Distribution system, you know, our pipes and our pumps and our valves and all the other appurtenances that we have in the system, our backflow preventers and our flush hydrants and so forth, and our meters. Offices, the buildings and the computers and the files, transportation and our work vehicles, very important to water systems in Kentucky, the work vehicles. And then of course, communications, you know, telephones and cell phones and radios and our SCADA systems, all those things are very important and need to be determined, you know, the critical components of our system. Next slide. So what we do is we think about all those different assets and the critical assets, and we just ask some different questions to them is what we have done in the past and continue to do. You know, is access to the critical water components restricted to authorized personnel only? You know, are there fences in their gates? Are they locked where appropriate? We have fences and gates on things. Are they locked where they're supposed to be? You know, are the points of entry kept closed and locked? Do they have adequate external lighting around some of these critical components? You know, we work with rural communities, small rural communities, and sometimes, you know, like pump stations and places like that, they aren't very well lit. Do they need to have that external lighting, some additional lighting installed? That's some of the questions that we ask. Next slide. Are warning signs posted on the critical components? We found, like I said, we go out and when we do these assessments, we go out and we look at the pump stations and we look at the tanks and we look at the water plant. And it's just kind of funny. It seems like there's several systems that don't really utilize warning signs much, and that can be one of the least expensive things a system can do is put in some warning signs. So we try to suggest that when possible. And then do they have alarm systems or security cameras? I can't count the number of times I've gone and they have a security camera, but it just doesn't work that well, or we never really had a chance to install it. Those are very, very important. And then one of the things that we talk about thinking outside the box. If they are worried about like a pump station that's kind of out somewhere or a tank, we are thinking about the idea of using hunting trail cams. For those of you that are deer hunters or hunters of any kind, you understand those are the cameras you can put on trees and things, and to take video of that kind of stuff. That might be one out of the box way of thinking on that, to be able to get some eyes on these areas that are out of the public view. Key control, very important. Do they have a key control and accountability policy? Unfortunately, in many of these systems, everybody has the key to everything. That's not really the way to go. You need to have good key control and accountability. Another one that's kind of outside the box, neighborhood watch program. That doesn't cost you anything. All you need are some nosy neighbors. That's probably the most inexpensive thing you can do. Is if you have people that live in the general area around a tank, near a tank, or near some pump stations, and sometimes they're in very remote locations, but sometimes you'll have some people living near them. More times than not, those people know who's supposed to be up at that tank and who's not. If somebody's at the pump station, it's not a water tank truck, they know and they'll call somebody. So let's don't complain about nosy neighbors. Let's embrace them and use that as a way to keep eyes on our critical assets. And then we talked about backup generators, or are there pump stations equipped with generator hookups? That way, if they do have power outage, do they have portable generators they can use? If they have hookups at their pump stations, they can utilize those. And then once again, with billing system, is it backed up regularly, and are their computers and accounts passwords protected? They need to make sure that that is going on. They don't really think about that a lot with their computers and their billing, but that is definitely important. Next. Once that we identify all these risks and things, we just need to prioritize the actions that are needed. And by how we do that is we prioritize those actions based on the most likely threats to the system and the magnitude of the risk to public health, based on those two things. And they need to take action to address the most critical risks, and then develop a timeline perhaps to address the rest, but they need to take immediate action on those that are most critical. Next slide. So when we go out to these plants and we go out to these assets for systems, we take pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. Worth 1,000 words. And so in this particular case, this is a critical valve they decided to lock up. I think it's a good idea. I know there are several valves, and even in small systems, but they need to lock those when possible. Next slide. This one was taken at a water tank. This is a standpipe tank, and you see that gentleman. I have the same kind. That's not me, but I have the same kind of bill as that gentleman right there. And he might have a hard time getting through that little space, but I know there's some thinner people than me that can get through there. I mean, what's the point of having a 12-foot high fence with razor wire if someone can slip in between the post and the tank? Next. The next one, this was one that our state director and myself had gone to. It's a brand new water plant at the time. And once again, that's kind of a wide space at the bottom of that fence. This is brand new equipment, brand new fencing. And they could have taken it down just a bit farther. It might be a little bit nitpicky, but they need to have, don't have razor wire and stuff at the top of your fence so somebody can get in underneath your fence. Next. Sometimes you do the best you can do and somebody still gets in, even with your best efforts. This was at a water tank and a kind of a remote tank. Someone had just cut the fence at the gate there and got in. They had some, they were using that tank as a cell tower as well. And they didn't really try to do anything to the water, but they tried to steal parts and things off that cell tower. So vandals and thieves can still find a way sometimes if they really want to get in. Next. You want to try to keep greenery or brush or any kind of trees cleared away from fences and things. So we recommend to this system here, they always say they need to clean that fence row out. Someone could get up over that razor wire, won't bother them if they can climb right up that bush or right up that little tree and get over into the system. Next. And then the last one here I think is kind of hilarious. Not really, because it's kind of sad, but it says chlorine is on. The alarm does not work. Be careful. Well, that's really nice. I appreciate them telling me to be careful. But as an employee, I don't think I'm going back in there until they get that stinking alarm fixed. So, but that actually is a sign that was in that plant that we saw. Next. And then, so basically all the things that we've kind of already done in the past with RCAP, they're going to be transferable to the risk and resiliency assessments. Next slide, please. Lauren's already done a great job talking about, but all these things that include into the new risk and resiliency assessment, we're already doing as RCAP with the systems that we're working with. All these things have been included, we've talked about, we've discussed. Next. And Lauren, like I say, she already discussed the EPA guidance. That's good guidance. It is very qualitative, but like I say, systems our size that we operate with are used to those kind of things, and that is kind of their speed. Next, please. Next slide. And like I say, Lauren's already gone through those, the malevolent acts versus the natural acts. The malevolent acts are, like I say, vandalism is one of the main things they deal with, rather than they don't really think necessarily of someone that's going to try to contaminate finished water or source water, but they do know that could happen. But more times than not, it's vandalism or somebody trying to take target practice on a tank. Next. We deal with all these, on this particular slide, all these natural hazards in Kentucky, and a couple that aren't on there, straight line winds that we get in the mountains. We don't really get tornadoes, but we get straight line winds, which do the same amount of damage. Drought's another big one that we deal with quite often, and really you wouldn't think necessarily, but earthquakes as well, since part of the state sits on the New Madrid seismic system. So we also have an opportunity to get earthquakes from time to time. And we want to make sure that we deal with all of those as we write them up. Next. This is some of the information that Jeff, and I don't want about out of time, so kind of go quickly, but you already know this information. Lauren already kind of covered that about what the that community water systems serving more than 3,300 persons must do those things. Yes.
Chris, sorry to interrupt. This is Deborah. Since we have some technical difficulties, you can go ahead and talk till 3:10. You don't have to try to rush.
I'm talking 3:10. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Because I know I'm hitting warp speed right about now, and people probably can't understand me. Okay, so thank you for letting me know. Some of the information, like I say, that our national office wanted me to share with you is, like I say, talking about the AWIA requirements. And like I say, Lauren's pretty much covered that for us already, did a great job with her presentation. But, serving more than 3,300 persons, you have to update, of course, update your risk and resilience assessment, update your ERP, submit that to EPA, of course, just the certification, not the actual emergency response plan, not the actual assessment, but only a certification that you've completed those. And we need to make sure our systems understand that. And then to review and update both of those every 5 years, like say via EPA's requirement. And once again, only the certification is required, not the submission of those documents, because those are sensitive documents. Next. And quickly, Jeff Oxenford, like I say, who is the RCAP Director of Training and Technical Services at our national office. This is the RCAP network. We are a national network that provides training and technical assistance across the country. We have on-ground staff in every state and Puerto Rico. Of course, I'm there. We are there in Kentucky. We're part of Great Lakes RCAP. And yes, there is not a Great Lake kind of near us in West Virginia, but we are part of Great Lakes. And once again, like I say, we provide training and technical assistance across the country. Next. So some of the things that we do with technical assistance, of course, we provide technical assistance. We assist communities in developing risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans under EPA. Like I say, EPA funds us, as does USDA rural development. So we actually go into communities. We do, go in and we assist them where we can, all the way from developing these risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans to actually assisting them with submitting their certification if need be. We go and we try to work with them every step of the way to make sure they're successful in completing that and several other tasks that we work with systems on. And then, of course, for training, that there is a new e-learning program, certificate program, rather, I guess, that was developed, that RCAP developed with the American Water Works Association, or AWWA. And it's called the RCAP AWWA Small Systems Resiliency Certificate Program. And those are e-learning modules that are brand new. They've just come out. And of course, we can do in-person or virtual AWIA training. And then one of the tools that Jeff wanted me to briefly share about was about the RCAP AWWA, and it actually goes with the kind of goes in conjunction with the e-learning program, but it is a Small Systems Risk and Resilience Assessment Guidance Document. EPA, obviously, Lauren's told us about that one, and that's a good one as well. The RCAP AWWA Small Systems Risk and Resilience Assessment, those worksheets are just another tool that can be used. They meet all of the requirements just as well as the EPA guidance document does to meet the requirements for RRA under AWIA. And then so I just kind of wanted to briefly talk about those two things, and I'm almost done. I'll try to zip through very quick. Next slide, please. So on the e-learning modules, there are 5 different courses as part of that program. And the first course, these obviously these 5 modules are being used to address AWIA. Once again, RCAP and AWIA developed these. And the first course, obviously, it's an introduction to AWIA, an introduction to the Resiliency in America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. The second course is based on the J100 standard and talks about operation measures for resiliency. It includes a field assessment checklist that can be used to assess in the field the resiliency of specific assets in the field. Course number 3 covers how to do a risk and resiliency assessment and focuses on the RCAP AWIA guidance document. And like I say, it's very similar to, I think it's similar to the one that EPA did. I think it just kind of takes it maybe a step further to help communities prepare for conducting the ERP. It's just maybe a bit more detailed. And also, it can be utilized if systems want to go a bit farther, if they decide they do want to go ahead and do a VSAT, for instance. And like I say, a lot of ours may not want to do that, but some may. We think that this guidance document, this RCAP AWIA one, will be a bit more robust and might help them, if they want to go ahead and complete a VSAT, might help them do that a little bit better. Course number 4, how to develop a small system emergency response plan, basically focuses on how to do an ERP, and it does utilize EPA's ERP template, and Lauren, already described that and talked about that. That's a great document, and like I say, once again, just so thankful that EPA has provided those guidance documents, the RRA one and the ERP one, to make sure that these systems comply with the AWIA. We want to make sure they comply. And so we actually have had a template, that RCAP's had an ERP template for a while, since back in 2002. But we're going to utilize this one of EPA. And I am going to be using the EPA ERP template. It's very great. It's a very good template. And so that's what that course number 4 will focus on, is how to do an ERP and to use EPA's ERP template. And then the 5th one is still somewhat under development. I think it'll be completed soon from what I understand, but it's basically about cybersecurity, and it's going to discuss cybersecurity, and it's based on an AWIA cybersecurity tool. Next slide. So the certificate program, the RCAP AWIA Small Systems Resiliency Certificate Program, it can actually be found on AWIA's Small Systems webpage, and it's free of charge. You do not have to be a member of AWIA to access the modules. And as far as getting, as far as certificate requirements, certification requirements, you just have to complete all the courses. And of course, course 5 is not available yet, but hopefully it'll be available soon. And so, but you have to complete all the courses, including course number 5 when that's available, and you'll receive a certificate of completion for each course once you complete it. Now, at the end of each course, there's a test that you'll be tested on, you'll have to take, and then you'll end up getting 1 certificate for passing all those tests, the courses and the tests. You'll get 1 certificate for that. And then, like I say, that will give you a lot of information. You'll be certified in how to do RRAs and emergency response plans via AWIA. Next slide. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention the RCAP AWIA Small System Risk and Resilience Assessment Worksheet. As I say, this is RCAP. This is a brand new document that was developed by them, by us, and AWIA. And once again, it's just a little bit different guidance document. The EPA one is a good one. I believe this one's a good one as well. But these are the things, the sections that it covers. And I just kind of wanted to run through those really quickly for you. Of course, the general utility information, and then the section 2 is potential critical assets, to identify what the critical assets are in the system. Section 3, talking about potential threats, you need to evaluate the likelihood of different threats occurring to your system. So we're going to have these conversations with the system. We're going to discuss it, and we're going to first identify where the critical assets are and the likelihood of the different threats that are going to occur in that particular system. And then in section 4, talk about potential consequences. We're going to consider the consequences of losing each of those assets, of those critical assets, if a particular threat occurs. On to section 5, and then based on those 2 things, on the potential threats and potential consequences, you're going to choose mitigation measures for these critical assets. Section 6 talks about the additional AWIA requirements It talks about monitoring practices and financial infrastructure, the use, storage, or handling of various chemicals, O&M practices, capital improvement projects, and operational and maintenance needs, and any changes or suggestions to improve the resiliency for each of those things. So it actually does cover everything, just like the EPA guidance document does for RA. It covers all the basics and meets the requirements of the AWIA law regulation. But as I say, it does state actually on the form that it does meet the basic elements of the risk and resilience assessments to comply with AWIA. But it can be used to support the inputs necessary. Like I say, if they want to go ahead and try to do a BSAT, if they're a big enough system to do that and they want to do that, the answers to some of these questions should be able to assist them with that, maybe more so than the EPA guidance document. And that's how they wanted to draft this guidance document for the RCAP AWA one. Next slide. Actually, I'm finished, and I know, like I said, I'm sorry for the technical difficulty at the beginning. I really didn't touch anything, so I don't know, but I guess this is the way it goes with me. Fate shines on me that way sometimes. But I hope that it's been, this might not be the presentation you normally hear on one of these great monthly EPA webinars, but I just wanted to, like I say, share some thoughts from the field, from on the ground. We come up with great ideas sometimes, but we need to make sure we put those into practice in the field. And so I just want to give you all some field tips and some of my experiences, and hopefully those were helpful to you, or at least entertaining. And as far as the existing VAs that we've done in the past, they are going to be able to be used. That information can definitely be used to smoothly transition into doing, and has been smooth into transitioning to these risk and resilience assessments that we're assisting systems with now. If you already done one of those in the past, a VA, then you're way ahead of the game as far as trying to get the risk and resiliency assessment done. And then I would request that you would check out the new RCAP AWIA tools and e-learning modules. I think they're really good. If you have any questions about those specifically, you can go to the next slide. If you have any questions about those specifically, I say those are brand new, the e-learning modules and the RCAP AWA guidance document. If you have any direct questions about those, obviously my email information is on there on this last slide, but also Jeff Oxenford, who is he's our RCAP Director of Training and Technical Services. You can also email Jeff as well if you want to see, get a copy of the actual worksheets or learn more about the e-modules. His email address, and like I said, I don't have it on my slide, but his email address is joxenford, which is JOXENFORD @rcap.org. Thank you. I think I'm out of time, even with the extra time I was given, and I do appreciate that. And say thank you so much for your participation or for your attentiveness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was really great. Appreciate all of your insight from the field. As you said, sometimes we get caught up in our offices and don't hear that much about what happens out in the systems.